on mercy. We've been doing that for the last 3 or 4 weeks, both in Sunday morning and in our small groups. If you're not a part of a small group, our small group schedule is on the inside of the program. We have small groups on Tuesday night, small groups on Thursday night, small groups on Sunday morning, meeting at homes throughout the community. If there's one that doesn't fit your schedule, please tell us. We'll build one just for you. We want every adult in our church involved in small groups. Right now, we're about 75% of our adults are in a small group every week, meeting together, getting to know each other, studying God's Word. We really would like to kick that up. I'm not going to be. There was a time in our church, very briefly, we were at 115% of our adult attendance was in small groups. I want to get back to that. So make sure not only you come, but if you know coworkers, neighbors, and friends, it's a very safe place where a few group people get together, have some coffee, have some refreshments, study God's Word briefly, share together. You're done in an hour and a half. It's a great opportunity to come together. So I encourage you to prayerfully consider your involvement in our small group ministries. We're talking about mercy, and this morning we're talking about your ministry of mercy. We're kind of pivoting. For the last 3 sermons, we've been talking about how God's mercy has been extended to us and how that really empowers us and motivates us and encourages us to be people of mercy, to be people of forgiveness. And we've talked about what forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't. And we've talked about how great God's mercy is to us. But this morning we pivot a little bit and start talking about your personal ministry of mercy and what that might look like. We're going to be in the Gospel of Mark this morning and also in the book of Isaiah. And again, there's a white outline inside your programs. You can follow along, fill in the blanks. If you'd like to, it's perforated so you can keep it. And then also in the red books in front of you are Bibles. So it might be easier to follow it that way. It's in page 991 in those red books in front of you. It'll also be projected up here as well. As we begin by looking at Mark chapter 1, beginning in verse 40. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him and he was cured. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning, "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Well, instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. And as a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. And yet the people still came to him from everywhere. Jesus, on what's called the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, tells us that blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. That's the next slide, John. Got it? Okay. Oh, he's already in Isaiah already. He's a little bit behind me, a little bit ahead of me. There we go. We'll get there. There we go. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. And we get sometimes confused about exactly what mercy is. So let me give you a real quick answer, real easy one. Mercy is nothing more than love in action. Mercy is love in action. Mercy is giving someone really, is understanding their need and reaching out to them in their need, overseeing the fault, and being able to meet them where they are. Mercy is nothing more, nothing less than love in action. And here we see Jesus in Luke talking to a leper and being incredibly compassionate. Another word we kind of have to get our brains around. What does it mean to be compassionate? Well, to be compassionate, basically it means to enter into someone else's pain. When you're compassionate, you enter into somebody else's pain. Now, we tend to fall short about this. We tend to not follow Christ's example here because we get confused between compassion and pity. We get confused. Let me give you a couple examples. Pity would say something like this. "Hey, have you heard about so-and-so? He lost his job 3 months ago. Poor guy." That's pity. You got an emotional attachment, you care, you know it bothers you. But compassion would say, hey, did you hear about so-and-so? He lost his job 3 months ago. Poor guy. I wonder what he needs. Let's go find out how we can help him. That's compassion. It's got feet. It's got a voice. It does something. Pity would say, did you hear about the woman down the street? The single mom who's been in the hospital for 3 weeks? Poor girl. She never gets a break. Now, that's pity. But compassion would say, did you hear about the single mom who's been in the hospital for the last 3 weeks? She just never gets a break. Poor girl. We need to find out how we can help her. What does she need right now? Maybe we can help take care of her kids. Does her family need food? What can we do to relieve and lift her out of her pain? See, that's the difference between pity and compassion. And for many of us, we're really, really good at pity. We're really, really good at hearing someone's need. And we'll even make it spiritual. I'll pray for you. We'll even make it spiritual. Now, I want to warn you about that. If you ever do that, if you ever look at someone and say, I will pray for you, let's just make a little contract between ourselves right now, okay? If you ever tell anybody, I will pray for you, here's what you're actually saying, okay? What you should be saying is, I'm going to commit to praying for you. Now, if I'm praying for you, that means you're on my heart and you're on my mind. So that means I am also going to be asking you in a couple of days, maybe a week, how's it going? Because I need to know if I need to pray different. And I need to know if I'm going to be a part of the answer or not. And I can't know that if I don't follow up. So if I'm going to pray for you, let's be honest about this. We're going to pray for people, then let's really pray for people. And that means we get involved. And that means we find out what happened. Because how often does it happen that we pray for people and we never find out what happens? And see, it's so much more encouraging when we pray for people and then find out they were healed or their need was met or God is giving them the strength to continue to keep on keeping on. And those are things we can celebrate, but we can't celebrate them because we don't know, because we never ask those follow-up questions. So if you're going to pray, just don't pray. That's like spiritual pity. If you're going to pray, then really commit to following up. But even just as important is that physical thing of not just, wow, that's really a tough situation, but be able to say, Lord, what can I do? Because this morning we have the model. We have the model. Because this is early in his ministry, early in the Gospel of Mark, and a man with leprosy came to Jesus. Now you kind of have to stop right there and kind of get an idea of what we're talking about here, because leprosy is not an easy thing. And when Jesus and this leper meet, there's a pretty important thing that's happening. Jesus is putting legs and feet on his compassion. Kay Warren, Saddleback Church, Rick Warren's wife, puts it this way. Compassion is about making a decision, kind of like love is. It's not an emotion. Expressing compassion is a deliberate choice to embrace pain that is not your own. It's a choice to embrace pain that is not your own. We are most like Christ when we choose to offer the gift of our presence and choose to absorb within ourselves the suffering of the least, the last, and the lost. If you're looking for Jesus, that's where you'll find him. And that's where the leper found Jesus, in this particular meeting. But you kind of have to get an idea of what's really going on there, because it just sounds so simple. A leper came to him. Well, let me help you understand what we're talking about. In the book of Leviticus, that's kind of the law book of the Old Testament, it talks about how things are supposed to be handled in the Old Testament times. And one of those is in Leviticus 13, where it tells how a leper has to act. A leper must wear torn clothes. Imagine, it's a requirement. Have to wear torn clothes. Must let his hair be unkept. So it has to look kind of wild and uncared for. Cover the lower part of his face and then cry out to all those around him, unclean, unclean. Because remember, just touching a leper made the person who touched them unclean, unable to go to worship, unable to be in the temple, unable to give sacrifice until they went through a cleansing process. Imagine living your life that way. You know, they had to live in caves. They couldn't live amongst the population because no one was allowed to touch them. And they weren't supposed to be out in public. So this leper is taking a huge risk. You know, just talking to Jesus, just coming out and meeting him. And he said, he begged him on his knees, if you are willing, you can make me clean. See, leprosy wasn't just a physical disease. Because of the isolation, because of the way you were being identified, it just didn't kill your body, it killed your soul too. You couldn't be with your family, couldn't be with your friends. You couldn't worship, you couldn't go to temple, couldn't make sacrifice. And notice what the leper says. He says, Jesus, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Didn't ask him, can you make me clean? See, the leper already understood Christ's power. Already understood he had the ability. The issue would be, would he be willing? Not would he be able? Because God's always able. It says in verse 41 that filled with compassion, Jesus reached out and touched the man. Now, this is kind of an E.F. Hutton moment. Okay? This is kind of a shocking moment. I know some of you are too young to remember those wonderful E.F. Hutton commercials. You know, now just like when all those people were talking in a crowded room, and some guy would say, well, E.F. Hutton, my financial advisor, says, and the whole room would go silent. Everybody turned right toward him. Because Jesus reached out and touched the man. Now, only two things can happen. Because remember, like I told you, if you touch someone afflicted with leprosy, you become unclean yourself. So only two things could happen. Either the leper gets healed, or Jesus now becomes ceremonially unclean. That's it. Only two things can happen. Either healing or he becomes unclean. Jesus, without hesitation, filled with compassion, touches the leper. One of the things that they teach us when we're doing hospital ministry is don't be afraid to touch. You know, don't be afraid to take the arm, take the hand. Don't be afraid to touch the person in the hospital, because physical touch is so critically important. And even when they're on some kind of, situation where, they're in some kind of isolation, and, you get outside to that particular place, and you're wearing the gloves, and you're wearing the gown, and you're wearing the mask. I look like a clown whenever, because they're yellow, right? I look like a gigantic lemon on steroids whenever I'm in one of those things. But even when you're doing all that, I still make it a point to touch the person because it's important. Physical touch is really important. If you want to communicate important information to somebody, touch them. Changes the whole conversation. Now, I mean to do that in love and gently. Okay? I don't mean touch them. Okay, I mean to touch them. Okay, you get a different point across the other way. But to be loving and caring and to show physical touch. And so reach out and touches him, it says. And it says, immediately, the leprosy left him, and he was cured. He said, Jesus is always willing. And to be like Jesus, he calls us to also be willing. Always be willing to be people of compassion. Now, Jesus did something a little interesting here. After he's healed, Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. He said, don't go blabbering it all over the place. Don't go telling people. But go show yourself to the priest and offer a sacrifice that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. Now, why? And what exactly is that sacrifice? Why does this matter? Why is Jesus specifically saying to do this? Well, let's find out first of all what it is, because that's important to know. Is what exactly is the sacrifice that does Moses does require? Well, it's in Leviticus. It's in Leviticus 14. We'll have it up on the screen for you. When a person had leprosy and they came to the priest because they wanted to be clean, it says, the priest is to slaughter the lamb in the holy place for the sin offering, and the burnt offerings are slaughtered. Now, this gets interesting. And the priest is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Now, I don't exactly know why, but that was the Levitical law. This is how you symbolized being cleansed, okay, from leprosy. Earlobe, thumb, foot. Now, you could theorize about it being the right side of the body, about being from the head, the top of your head. You could do all this. But what's important here is that actual procedure. That he's actually doing it a certain way here in Leviticus. Now, what's really interesting about that, if you dig a little bit deeper, is that's not a unique set of circumstances. It happens another time for an entirely different reason. And it's back in Leviticus 8. Okay, so hang on. Moses slaughtered the ram and took some of its blood and and here it comes. Now, this is when Moses is commissioning Aaron, okay, to lead God's people as a priest, to be that priest, right? Because remember, it's the Aaronic priesthood is the start of that whole analogy of priesthood. Moses slaughtered the ram, took some blood, now listen carefully, put it on the lobe of Aaron's right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Moses also brought Aaron's sons forward and put some blood on the lobes of their right ears, on the thumbs of their right hands, on the big toes of their right feet. Now, notice the exact same procedure for asking for healing of a leper is exactly the same procedure used to anoint and bless a priest of God. Exactly the same procedure. See, whether you're a priest or a leper, it's the same sacrifice. It's the same sacrifice for all of it. It's done exactly the same way. Exactly the same procedure. See, we're all called to understand that sacrifice of mercy. We're all called to understand that call to compassion, that need to be healed, that desire to share in someone else's pain. Now, of course, we know the rest of the story. Jesus said, "Go and show yourself," and it says right there in verse 45 that instead he went out and began to talk freely. It says, instead he began to talk freely, spreading the news, and as a result, Jesus could no longer enter the town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. It got so overwhelming because they wanted to meet this guy that he could no longer travel as he used to, but people would still reach out and find him. And that's what happens when we become a compassionate people. See, we seem to think that evangelism is all about telling people about their sin. That evangelism is all about telling people of their personal need of Jesus Christ. Newsflash. People already know they're fallen. People already know they make mistakes. You don't go around at work, you don't go to your place of business and say, "Hey, Joe, how was the weekend?" "Oh, it was wonderful. God appeared in fleshly form, and we had miracles and healings, and it was a great..." And it doesn't work that way, right? You don't go to school and, "Hey, Becky, how was the weekend?" "Oh, it was great. Got my homework done on Friday. I know it's got an ace, got everything done. It was wonderful. I had a great time." It doesn't work that way, because we're all human. We're all imperfect. We all make mistakes. And we don't need someone else to remind us we've already made them. We're already there. What all of us need, and what the people who you go to work with and go to school with and live with need to hear, is that there's a God who loves them anyway. Is there a God who cares for them anyway? And how are they going to know that? By you telling them how God has cared for you. And then allowing that compassion to be expressed to them. When we become God's messengers of compassion, when we accept our own ministry of mercy, then people want to know why we're weird. And I'm telling you guys, we need to embrace our weirdness. Because if you're a Jesus follower in today's culture, you are weird. First century, lepers out there, unclean, unclean, unclean. And he falls before Jesus and says, if you're willing, you can make me clean. Now, I'm telling you, the minute he dropped to his knees, the crowd kind of split open, right? Because it's a leper. And let's be honest, all of us have lepers in our lives. We have people who shout every day, unclean, unclean. Now, don't take that too literal. They're that kind of person because they dress funny. Or because they have a weird accent. Or because their skin tone's a little different than ours. They come from another part of the country. They have some unusual hobbies. I remember walking around Super Day once, and there was the USS Wyoming crew. These are a bunch of trekkers. Now, I'm a Star Trek fan, but I'm nowhere near that close. And they actually have the USS Wyoming here in Cheyenne. USS Wyoming, it's a Cheyenne-based Star Trek fan club. And they get in costume and do the whole bit, And some of them can talk Klingon. I mean, that's not wrong or right or wrong, but I will tell you that their booth was not a center of activity. Okay, I'm just being honest. Okay, because you had the real estate agents and you had the political people running for campaigns, and when you had the people handing out their free pens and their free little gift bags, and here was the crew of the USS Wyoming, and we could watch. I watched because people would go, "Oh, booth." Okay, walking. Booth. I mean, that's kind of funny, I walked up and said hi because who cares? And I'm a Trek fan too, but it's just. We have people like that. We have people like that we know at work. We have people we know like that at school. Sometimes we have people like that in our own families, right? And maybe sometimes it's us, right? Maybe. And the natural tendency we have is the same tendency the crowd had in that first century day. And that's to give them a nice, safe, wide berth. Because I don't have time for them. I don't have the energy for them. Sometimes, if we're really honest here, can us girls just talk? And be really, because guys, talk. See, I said girls, I said guys. I'm fair. Because gossip is an equal opportunity sin. And we can just say, I just really don't want to do that. Yeah, I really, because I don't want to be associated with them. It might rub off. They might start thinking I'm weird. They might start thinking that I'm a little strange. It's like when you're in school, right? When you're in high school, right? Everything's about cliques and groups and identity, And you got to wear the right clothes and the right shoes and wear your hair the right way and wear the right colors and hang with the right friends and go to the right classes and if you don't, well, then you're the outsider. And I think all of us experience both being on the inside and being on the outside. All of us sometimes have been a leper. All of us sometimes know one. And the real question becomes, what are we going to do? The crowd would give them an assured clear distance. See, the crowd, like the crowd in the first century, right, don't do the same thing today. Oh, Joseph's a little weird. Don't bother with him. Madeline's a little strange. Just, don't Don't get too close to her. Oh, that teacher, he's really weird. Just, you know. But instead, Jesus reaches out and touches. Jesus shows compassion. And we are called, as Jesus followers, to be people of compassion, to be willing to overcome that. And not just, oh, that poor girl. Ponytails are supposed to be on the left side this week. I can't believe she didn't get the text. You know, yeah, you need to, don't laugh, it happens. You know, we need to show some compassion. We need to reach out to these folks in real tangible ways. See, that's why in our small groups we have mercy projects right now, right? In all your small groups, remember that it's all this week, right? You signed that covenant in our small group meeting this week. You signed that covenant just for a week. You were going to try to not be the gossip, to not be the one slandering people, to not be the one, but you're going to be the ones to be forgiving. You were going to be caring. You were going to, get rid of all the slander and all the lousy guard. You're going to try. And most of us lasted, I don't know, until the refreshments were over. I mean, but we tried. Okay, we tried. We made the attempt. We're making the attempt. We're trying to be more compassionate people. We're going to try. Because it's important for us to be willing to reach out. It's important for us to be willing to make those acts of compassion. And that's where the mercy projects come in, where our small groups are coming together and saying, what can we do as a group? What can we do as a small group of people, 4 or 5 people, 6, 7 people, 2 or 3 people? What can we do to extend God's mercy into our world? Who can we help? Who can we support? How can we be Jesus in a tangible way? Because there's something so powerful about that. But see, it starts with Jesus saying, I am willing. That's where it starts. It starts with us choosing. See, it's not an emotion. If you're waiting to feel compassionate, good luck. Okay? If you're waiting to feel the supernatural urge to help somebody, good luck with that. Because our nature is not to do that. And our culture tells us not to do that. I mean, tell me a car commercial where the person in the car commercial gives the keys to a stranger. Or gives the keys to a family who doesn't have a car that works. No, they might give their Subaru to their daughter, or their son. But where do they give the key to a stranger? I mean, where in our culture do we see these models? We only see them, in the center of those who follow Christ. See, we have to be willing to ask the question, what am I willing to do? What am I willing to do? And it's a very, very important question. Because it flies in the face of what is our standard. And not just our standard. This is not a new issue. This is not a new problem. When Jesus spoke into the truth of us being compassionate, he was speaking to his own people and into his own day. We see that in Isaiah, our other main passage of the day. When we look at Isaiah 58, and beginning verse 5, good thing it's up there. Now, I have to give you a bit of background. Isaiah 58 is about fasting. Okay, it's a chapter about fasting. And about how the people of Israel of that day, in Isaiah's day, were fasting, and what God really wanted. And we pick it up in verse 5 where he's kind of doing not this but that. Verse 5 it says, is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for a man to humble himself? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying on sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast? A day acceptable to the Lord? Well, the obvious answer is, yeah, that's what I thought it was. You're dedicated to God and you don't eat and you feel miserable and you look miserable so everybody else knows you're miserable and they can admire how miserable you are. Isn't that what a fast is for? Right? And if we're honest about it, right? Us sometimes, right? We want people to notice how wonderful we are. When we do something for Jesus, we really want people to notice we did something really important for Jesus, and aren't we great people? Right? Let's be honest. let's go on there down to verse 6. Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe him and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here am I. If you do it with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger which is talk, and it keeps on going, and if you spend yourself on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday, and the Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched earth, and will strengthen your home, and you will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. If you're compassionate. See, real fasting is about making yourself available to others, not just denying yourself. Real fasting is about caring for other people. And notice the important relationship here. The prophet, God tells the prophet, tells people, hey, if you are a compassionate people, you open up the channels of compassion for God to bless you. You open up the channels for God to bless you. You see, mercy, being a merciful people, is the key to answered prayer. Being a merciful person is the key to answer prayer. See, God builds us. God designs us, hardwires us to be channels of blessing. To be channels of blessing. When I was a kid, I did something probably a lot of you do. You might be on a beach when you did this. You might have been in your backyard when you did this. But sometimes after a rain, or sometimes you're on the beach and after the waves have come up, you get little rivers of water. Get little rivers, right? And if you're like a typical kid sometime, you scooped out some of that earth. And you might have made a little lake or a little pond or a little miniature little depression of water. And then you'd make your own, right? You'd be like the great architect, this great excavator, your own private corps of engineers, and you're making little rivers, and then sometimes you'd pile up the dirt and you'd make dams, right? And you'd dam up the water, and you'd have to build around it because it started overflowing its banks. And then, of course, sometimes your parents, sometimes the local bully, sometimes because your mother told you to stay for dinner, right? You'd break the dam and the water would flow. God calls us to be rivers of living water. And to be a river of living water, you need two things. You need an inlet and you need an outlet. You need a place for the water to come in and a place for the water to come out. Now, the people that you know who don't know Jesus, they're like dry holes. Maybe there's a little bit of damp earth down the bottom of the thing. Because we know that in our humanity, in our mortality, compassion is something that on a good day, when we're in a good mood, and we're not busy, and we're not in a rush, and we have plenty of resources, and we don't have any aches or pains, and our calendars are reasonably open, we might be able to express a little bit of compassion. Right? But to be the kind of compassionate person that Christ is calling us to be, we have to be filled with something outside of ourselves. We need a power and a strength that's got nothing to do with us, but has everything to do with God. That's why personal devotions matter. That's why, daily being in God's Word and praying matter. We talked about those four legs of a chair. That's why being in a small group matters. That's why being together in corporate worship matters. And that's why using your gifts in ministry and service to the kingdom matters. Because those are things that allow the gates to be open, the intake valves to be full open, so God's grace and mercy can flow into you. So you can rejoice and celebrate what God has done for you. So you can day after day acknowledge He forgave my sins, not because I deserved it, but because He loved me anyway. He died on the cross for me personally. And I can accept that personally and make Him my personal Savior and work on making Him my personal Lord. But see, that's only half the battle. Because for so many of us, we get lazy and we get complacent. And we're like that little dam we built. And God's blessing comes in, but it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. And you know what happens when things go into a life and it doesn't go anywhere? If that happens long enough, you have to hire a company to take a backhoe and dig out your septic tank and empty it out. It goes bad. It gets stale. It gets rank. The whole world knows it's a problem. And eventually, yeah, it stinks. But the other thing that can happen, right, is the river can back up. I mean, sometimes it can actually reverse flow. We've seen it like floods and when you have big tidal waves out there in Louisiana and the coast. I mean, sometimes actually, rivers are supposed to flow to the ocean, flow the other way, because of the pressure being so great. And that can happen too. I mean, where we ball it up and therefore we wonder why I'm not happy, why I'm not feeling God's joy, why don't I feel God's presence, why I don't know God's peace. Well, you're all dammed up. Is there a double entendre there somewhere? You're all dammed up. And so you're not able to be that flow of Christ's blessing. But when you break the dam and you start choosing, remember, not waiting to feel. Forget that. Choosing to be compassionate. Choosing to be the person who's willing to touch the leper in your life. Because just like Jesus, right? The leper never asked, "Are you able to heal me?" Because he already knew he was. And I will guarantee you that the lepers in your life already know you're able. Because they're not asking for supernatural healing. They're asking for a moment of humanity. They're asking for someone to overlook whatever their quirks might be long enough to get to know the person behind those quirks. They're looking for someone to do more than pity them in their need, but to actually do something about it in the capacity they have, however small that might be. But when we do that, we say we are willing. And when we're willing, that breaks that logjam and allows God's mercy and grace not just to flow out of us, but to flow through us. See, that's the point. To flow through us. And we become clean. Our waters become fresh. Our algae blooms die down. When we're willing to be instruments of God's mercy and grace, we're willing to be the key to answer prayer. Because the simple reality is, every single one of us in this room is somebody's answered prayer. Every single person in this room is somebody's answered prayer. And that prayer will be answered by us being willing to entertain, to adopt, to embrace our own ministry of mercy. If you haven't felt God's joy in your life, if you haven't felt God's peace in your life, if you haven't felt God's power in your life, you better check. There might be a dam downstream. There might be something getting in the way. Because God doesn't bless us just so we can sit there and absorb it. He blesses us so we might bless others. And our greatest blessing comes when we choose to embrace our own ministry of mercy. So when you get your small groups, take those mercy projects seriously. Right now, as the Holy Spirit is bringing to your remembrance, your lepers, because we've all got them, might be a relative that you know you should talk to. And you've just been putting this off for years, maybe even decades. It's that classmate at school that nobody else talks to. Nobody else will sit with them for lunch. It's that person in the locker down the hall from you who, constantly gets kidded by the town bully or the athletes or the geeks or whoever might be after him. It's that person at work that just doesn't quite fit in. And when you go to the luncheons and you go to the birthday parties, all the people are gathered around and busily talking and having a wonderful experience, and there's that one coworker off in the corner just quietly kind of eating the cake and hoping nobody, hurts them. We've all got them. Christ calls us to be his instrument of compassion, to be his instrument of healing, to make that our personal ministry of mercy. And I know we've all blown it. We've all messed up. We've all turned a blind eye, complained we were too busy, thought of 4,000 other things we'd rather be doing. But this morning, let's make a commitment, shall we? Let's make a commitment to touch the lepers in our lives. Let's make a commitment to bring healing to those who are hurting, to do more than just pity people, but to truly be compassionate. This morning, let's together make a commitment, both as a church and as individuals, to truly accept our personal ministry of mercy. If you want someone to pray with you about that, the altar up here is open during our closing time of prayer. We'll be glad to pray with you as we sing our closing song. You can make that commitment in the pew. You can make that commitment later today. I mean, God's here. He hears you. But I encourage you to make the commitment, to take that person, that individual, that group to your prayer closet and pray for them, and to begin your ministry of mercy. Let's stand together as we close. Lord, we just thank you and praise you for the truth of your word, that your